Hey, Liz. I'm not trying to get involved in your private life or anything, but I was going through your desk and I found these. Oh, Liz, don't you know birth control is abortion?
But it isn't abortion.
Look, Liz, your boss shouldn't have to pay for all those abortions.
Well, good talking to you.
Hello, Washington, D.C. This is your political machine. I'm out here on the street today to find out why people might support Muriel Bowser. Sir, what do you think of Muriel Bowser? No comment. I don't know where the money came from.
Look, folks, I'd love to marry you, even though it's 4:53 p.m. on a Friday and I really have somewhere to be, but the fact of the matter is I can't because of my religion. You know what I mean? Where would it all end up?
Keep marriage open for all happy couples across our great nation.
I told you nobody likes your monocle. It's ridiculous.
Everyone loves monocles. They can kiss my puppet ass.
Thank you, God bless you, and God bless the United States of the Uteri.
If you think this sounds crazy, how would you feel if it were going on in Maryland schools?
Visit marylandeducators.org/get-it-right to learn more. This computer seems to be broken.
Texas extremes, past bullshit schemes make laws clinics can't abide. We fought in vain, now 6 remain. Access sure to be denied.
I'm sure they are lovely people, sir, but I'm afraid Michigan has taken the unusual step of requiring women to carry rape insurance.
I'm sorry.
What?
Yep. In Michigan, a new law requires women to get extra health insurance, just in case she gets raped and needs abortion care.
Just let me help you find the Cory Gardner tab.
There is no way I'm voting for Cory Gardner.
What? He loves the ladies. Said so himself a bunch of times.
But he'd make most forms of birth control illegal.
You seem kind of obsessed with sex, Liz. It's very unhealthy. Just vote for Cory. Come on.
Hello, everybody. You know, in all of my years of being a political machine, there's one thing that helps me find solace in all of the hectic noise of Washington. It's so easy being green, spending cash the color of the leaves, or maybe red or yellow.
Hey, yo, Liz, what are you up to?
I told you I was gonna go vote about 15 minutes ago at the office.
Right. I just wanted to make sure you were voting for Tom Tillis. I hear it's really good for the lady voters. Is there a special word for voters when they're ladies?
Hey, welcome back to the show. And what you were just seeing is actually videos that were made by our next guest, Elizabeth Dapo. All of these at the company I used to work at, Revolution Messaging, where we sort of got a reputation for making a lot of puppet videos, but in fact, the genius behind it all is Elizabeth Dapo, who's here with us today. And she's currently the artistic director of Puppet Co. and a friend of the show. So thank you so much for coming on, Elizabeth.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, this is the things that we say when we come on shows. We're doing it right.
We're doing it right. I think I've seen enough Good Morning America, so I think I've got this.
You're
down.
not just a craftsperson, you are also an academic. Can you actually just give us your background? Because when I start asking you some questions, I don't want people to think that I'm this huge, obnoxious person. You actually have the answers.
Sure. I've been a professional puppeteer since about 2010. I have my undergrad in acting and directing from Binghamton, but I got my graduate degree in puppetry and devised performance from the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama in London.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, which is super impressive and which I think probably steeps you in more of the background of this. And I would say, I think one of the things that we found so useful in using puppets is how much more human than human they can be when it comes to our ability to put empathy on them, but also our ability to accept them as somewhat two-dimensional. I mean, what do you think about the sort of interplay of what is special and different about a puppet theater versus the regular theater? And how does that play into satire?
Well, I think it's really interesting because I think, historically speaking, puppets have been able to get away with things that people haven't been able to get away with for centuries. Anytime that performances were halted or stopped because people were inciting riots or things were getting really interesting or testy in countries, puppets were still allowed to perform because their opinions were considered trivial, which meant that people weren't actually looking at them as instigators, but in all reality, they were the ones that were communicating some of these bigger political messages and these hierarching themes that were really pulsating through communities at the time. I think we can look at puppets sometimes. You know, one of the big questions that puppeteers ask themselves when they're creating something is, why puppets? So why do I use a puppet as opposed to putting a person in this place? And a big part of that is, you can make these images of these famous, of these people. You can characterize them, you can satirize them, and then you have an object that speaks for them. And that is so unique and so special in itself, because suddenly, there's a Spitting Image in the UK went through its thing, and then it's coming back now, which is really interesting. But like Margaret Thatcher, they had a great Margaret Thatcher puppet that would bash the heads of people. In the brain bashing, so like driving home those points. But you can do it with a puppet because a puppet is still an object. It's not a person going out and saying their opinion. So I think it's really fascinating in that regard that these, as you kind of put it, a two-dimensional object, this object takes on this whole new life and goes and can go in any direction.
But I do want to drill on this a little farther because there's something special here, because they're not cartoons in that, cartoon violence, Tom and Jerry, Itchy and Scratchy, or whatever, it's not the same. I think we import more human value on puppet, maybe because of the physicality of it, maybe for some other reasons. But the tension that I saw in the work we did together was in thinking about, we have this really broad strokes thing. We can have Margaret Thatcher bashing someone over the head, this kind of thing, with that balanced with the advice that you would give me in my amateur, trying to pantomime along with you while we would do puppet things, which was smaller is bigger, subtlety is what reads in puppetry. This is the opposite of cartoons.
Yeah, it is. And
there's no straight faces.
I think part of it, as children, when we watch shows that are geared for children, we put ourselves into those puppets' positions. So the reason that you might love a beloved character is because you can see some part of yourself in it, or you ascribe that emotion to it. So if a puppet shows you that it's happy or sad, it really isn't smiling. It really isn't changing its expression. It changes its body language a little bit. But you as a child look at it and go, oh, I get this. I can read this emotion. And it's still a tangible thing. I think that's what's really important, is especially like with theater, it's something, it's not a screen, there's no distancing, you are there with that object live, which is really fascinating. And I think cartoons have taken some of their lead from some styles of puppet theater, because if you think about like more modern cartoons that do satire, like, the big ones that are out there, you can look back at puppetry and you can look back at Commedia dell'arte and you can see the origins of attacking things with satire. It's really an interesting, very long history that goes behind it.
Yeah, and especially when I'm thinking of things like the French Revolution and, sort of especially kind of things done with the masses where it's better to have something that's not written, etc. This is all after the printing press, but it still is more helpful. What do you think is the relationship between sort of ridicule as a tactic and puppetry, and even some of the work that we did together? Like, because this is something that maybe normally I counsel against when, if you can make fun of Donald Trump, don't ridicule his figure, speak towards his policy or something like that. But with the puppets, it somehow is a license to maybe play around with that more. I don't know. Like, it seems to be, I guess it matters
I
which
think
direction it's pointing, up towards the king or down
it
towards the
does.
people, but please go ahead.
Oh, it absolutely does, and it's puppetry has been used on both sides. Like you were saying, the French Revolution. There's actually a case where a puppeteer had little guillotined people, and as people were being guillotined in real life, right next to the stage was a puppeteer guillotining people along with it, and showing people, look how ridiculous this absolutely is that's happening. There are a lot of parlor style shows that were happening in the French Revolution too, where people would come in and do little tiny shows that couldn't be shut down because they were parlor, things. I think it's fascinating because both sides have used it. The governments have used puppetry to get a message across or to stop a people from rising up to try to crush down or push people down. But the majority of puppetry has been used for the underdog, the little guy, to get their message across, to really try and throw it back in the government's face. And we get away with a lot more because I think when it's an object, there was a Trump puppet, a puppeteer named Brian Carson made a really great Trump puppet, and he was on Twitter the whole time. And he was a caricature of Donald Trump. So he had the big our little guy, you have him, it's so great. But you've got that, you overemphasize certain physical characteristics, and you can get away with that more than if you had a person like, when you have actors on Saturday Night Live doing it, then it's immediately called out. But if it's a puppet, we still have that gray area where we're okay with overemphasizing characteristics in puppetry that we're not okay with human people portraying. Fascinatingly, the Nazis took over some of there's a very famous puppet theater or puppet show called Punch and Judy. And Punch is this little guy who is spawned from Commedia, has deep roots coming from Italy, moving through. And Punch beats everybody up. Punch abuses his wife. Punch abuses his kid. He throws him off the stage at some point. Punch attacks a crocodile, and eventually Punch bests the devil. So Punch is supposed to represent the little man. He has a cousin in Germany, Casper. Mm-hmm. And during the Nazi occupation, it was decreed that all puppet shows would no longer portray Casper in a traditional way because he looked, quote, too Jewish. Mm-hmm. And the government went so far as to x-ray puppet heads to know the lineage of the puppet. Because if somebody had taken their head and resculpted a nose, then they would say this puppet is too Jewish, you can't use it. And that's, on one side of the coin, that's how puppetry was used against people. But then on the other side, right across the pond, Mr. Punch was dressed up as Winston Churchill and beating up Hitler. So the same character just twisted for different purposes. And I think it's all, it's all a matter of what is happening at the moment in time.
We put a lot on these little guys. You know what I mean? It's a lot for a puppet to bear in this world. Is there a difference? We're talking about a lot of traditions probably coming out of the Renaissance, other things, it's Europe. In Asia and shadow puppets, this is more of an elite tradition. And so do you see more of that top-downness maybe in the stories that are told coming out of that tradition? Or is that anything that makes sense to you?
Yeah, so you have it both ways again. You have, even though it was, it's considered an elite tradition, it still means it's for every person to enjoy. So there are different points of history, especially in China, where puppets were not only used to propagate what was being decreed, what was being said, but also on the lower tiers of society, it was being used to tell the fairy tales that were no longer being able to be told, to tell the stories and the folk heroes, because it still inspired people to rise up. And puppets were allowed to do it when people weren't allowed to do it. So you had shadow puppets and you had all these beautiful different styles, and they could still perform because it was considered high art still, but they weren't being censored nearly as often as acting troupes were. And you see that not only like European countries. America is relatively, I've tried to find more and more history about before colonization, what were the early American indigenous peoples, what was their version of a puppet, because every culture has
As
one.
a representative kind of
Yes.
object. Yeah.
Right. So like the Hopi, the little Zunis, they can also be considered a style of puppet because they're representative of a god, in that little form. It's just once like American puppetry really kicked off in the 1920s. And I'm also trying to, one of my current research ideas is to try to find more information about how, if enslaved people in the early part of the United States, how were they using puppets? Was puppetry something that came over from the African culture, and how was it part of the South? It's very hard to find anything about this. It's hard to find if there's any information anywhere, but I can't imagine it wasn't there somehow.
Yeah.
It's all fascinating, but every culture in the world has that instance of either somebody's pushing them down and puppets are there to push back.
I mean, fast forward though, because I would love to hear more about America in the parts that unfortunately we do have more information about. But, I think about the 60s, the 1960s, and kind of, the ideas like Bread and Puppets, I think is in Vermont, right? Or these kind of
Bread and Puppet is like the quintessential political puppet movement in the United States.
Does that come out of like American vaudeville and stuff, or is there sort of a unique like puppet tradition that you see starting as a folk tradition in America, probably in the 1800s sometime?
I think honestly, Bread and Puppet is sort of a unique creature, but it of course has all its roots throughout American puppetry. In Appalachia, in West Virginia, there is a whole troupe of puppeteers that were just up in the mountains that were telling these stories, and they had a huge folk influence. Using stylized American music with puppets, with a very unique style of American puppets. Bread and Puppet, brainchild of one man who basically was like, hey, we're going to do this thing. But in Chile, in Peru, in different parts of Africa, these huge effigies have always been used to represent people that maybe were not the most popular humans, like Mexico. I was just reading something the other day about Frida Kahlo, who brought back this Judas Day, where they would make these massive puppets that were effigies of Judas. But what they would do is decorate them to look like local officials that they didn't like, or police constables that they were not fans of, and then they would they'd parade them through town and light them on fire. And it got banned for years and years and years, and then basically Frida Kahlo brought it back. So these beautiful traditions all play into, and it's really hard not to think that everything that's happening culturally, artistically, on stage, in music, in visual art, doesn't have an influence on every other art form that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're looking at like German Expressionism, then you can see how it has influences on the puppet style at the time. Or if you're looking at a certain type of music that overtook a generation, you can see that in the puppetry being developed. Like you can almost hear it in certain puppeteers in how they worked and how they made stuff. So I think everything feeds into everything else, but it always has something to do with, where's the world at the moment? The 60s and 70s, Vietnam in the United States, this really hard cultural clash happening, and then these giant puppets showing up, and they hand out bread, homemade bread, when you go to a performance and you get bread and you get theater and you get brought into this great fold of people. And they do really hard-hitting political stuff. And then sometimes it's just really like, oh, butterflies in a field. This is great. So we have to really dive in and look at what's happening around us sometimes. I don't know if you know Theater for a New City in New York. They do a great. Crystal is the lady, and of course I'm blanking on her last name, but she has done this tour of parks in New York City where she takes this show out that she writes every year, and every year it's highly political, and every year it has puppets in it. So in New York City, it's still happening. The last time that I was up there, she was doing this show about how shit she thought the last administration was, and she was very vocal about taking it to public parks, and anybody could come see it. And that's kind of the beauty of it, is anybody can come see it. It's open for anybody. You don't have to pay a ton of money. It's not like going to the opera where you can feel out of place, even though you shouldn't. It's not like having an exclusive ticket to something. Puppets basically open access to everybody. Okay, I've ranted.
No, it's so true. It's so nice. And I think it's one of the reasons that we, found so much use for them. But now let's put on your craft hat, take off the academic hat, and let's talk about our relationship basically, which is like I present you with a problem. We are creating a splash page to show off our new digital smart capabilities. So what we really need from you is Gritty. The Philadelphia hockey team. We have some Europeans on here, so I'm not gonna know who Gritty is. But Gritty,
I love it.
So he's a mascot for a hockey team. He's a nihilist. He has sort of reputation. He's great, and he's running for president. And so we give you that, and you give us this. Here he is. So just walk me through what happened. I tell you that we need Gritty, but he needs to be running for office. And so you get to work. So talk to me.
So your projects were always really interesting because you'd say, "Hey, it's Friday, and I would if we could have this by next Tuesday, that'd be great." And I would go, "Yes, absolutely, yes. Let's try to figure this out." So what I do first is I go, "Gritty, okay, great. Let's find all the information I can find on Gritty. Who is Gritty? What does he look like? But also, what is he currently standing for with who he is?" When Gritty first came out, he was not well received by the public. Everybody was like, "What is this abomination?
Yeah.
Bring back our beloved, we don't want this." But then Gritty slowly took on this punk rock subculture feel of anything happening was because Gritty said
the
so.
Underdog of the underdog who always wins. Yeah.
Yes, and that's the thing is he got so big, and then during the most recent election, there were so many Gritty memes, and he's definitely used by this. I won't even say it's left; it's more progressive, but it's like this progressive punk movement that's happening. Anarchists love Gritty. They're everywhere on Facebook is Gritty. So I look at all of how is Gritty being used, and then I go, okay, great. I know what context he exists in here. How do I make him exist in this world that he wouldn't normally exist in if he's running for a public office?
Yeah.
So we get, he's got a nice suit on, and then I just start building. And I will say, I have learned so much by you telling me giving me these tight deadlines, but also giving me this fantastic motivation, because it encouraged me as an artist to keep pushing and growing and pushing and growing. And the thing is now, I have come so far the last 3 years in terms of being a builder, because I learned so much from having to play on the fly. When we did Eunice.
Yes.
Eunice was a 6-hour turnaround. So you told me I need a
Eunice,
uterus
you will
that
have
talks.
seen in the video, she is the uterus who represents Abortion AF, which is a reproductive rights group out of Brooklyn, New York.
Woo!
Which I'm
but we had 6 hours, and that's what the timeline I had, because I was like, finish this job, make puppet, give puppet. That's the timeline I have. So I sat down with a huge iced tea, as I'm prone to do, with lots of caffeine. And I went, okay, here's what my Google search history is great. Because it's what's uterus? Everything. I have looked for everything. So my first step is research. Research. And then I got to ask, why are we using a puppet? What does the puppet need to be able to do that, a human can't do? And obviously, an object is is something fantastic. An organ can't speak for itself, so let's make it the mouthpiece for this great, movement. And then I just start playing around with materials. Is this going to work? Is this going to work? And as I have found out, sometimes the best ideas are not your first ideas, your second ideas, or your third ideas. When we made our two little marionette guys, we went through a process there because I really
were the Koch brothers,
wanted to.
Dear viewer, it's just so that you know. Yeah, and they are.
Yes, they were.
I have them around someplace. They are just the creepiest.
They're really creepy. They are on my rebuild list because I want to make more. They're too uncanny valley, which is something you'll hear puppeteers and people will say with AI. Is the uncanny valley is if we mimic too close to what humans actually look like, people don't want to see it.
Totally.
So you have a very fine balance to walk when you're designing something of caricature versus hyperrealism. These guys were a little too hyperreal. They had teeth. It was a little much. But you kind of, you figure that out, and then you just play with materials and you see what sticks and you see what doesn't, and you learn from that process so that the next time around when you're doing, if you're saying, hey, I need another puppet, it's going to be this style, you have the basis set up and you can keep going forward.
And for anyone who
it's a lot of fun.
Anyone who thinks this isn't absolutely literally true, not that long after Eunice, we were working for a heart group, and we had to then make a talking heart, which actually came out really good.
Cora, yep.
Who was going to be the spokeswoman for the Women's Heart Alliance, yeah.
So it's and it's a challenge, but also at the same time it's so much fun, and getting to do what I consider a one-off project where we made Gary and Jill, we did it. We made them. They're out there in the world. It's fantastic, as opposed to designing an entire show, which is a whole different beast. That requires a lot of time, a lot of research, and then usually you're building maybe 10 to 20 puppets. The biggest build I ever did was a 40 puppet show,
That seems like a lot.
Which was insanity. I don't recommend it for the amount of time and money that I had behind the project. Don't recommend it.
Now just have them change clothes, you know what I mean? You need more outfit changes and fewer puppets.
That show was really fun. It was Cannibal the Musical, the Trey Parker and Matt Stone show. And one of the puppets had to get shot. So we had to make a puppet that was a trick puppet that you could wash its face and look normal, and then the next day blood would just shoot out of its forehead at the audience. And then make sure that it was okay the next day. So we had puppets like that. There was a whole sequence of black and white puppets that got killed in different ways. Like one of them was an alien chest
So it's like the puppets themselves are the color of the flashback.
Yeah, they were black and white puppets, and we had a black and white background.
Yeah.
And so it was a flashback told that way. And then, the only thing that was in color was, of course, the red of them dying. And then somebody would walk out and pick a puppet up and be like, and that's what really happened. But 40 puppets, that was a big show.
Before I let you go, though, I know it's a hard time for performers of all stripes, but especially theater performers. How is that, and what can people do to make sure that they can even virtually participate in your upcoming season at the Puppet Co?
I will say performers have absolutely been struggling. COVID shut down everything that we as a community had to offer. I know so many people who lost so much money and income and gigs this year. It's not even, and I know it's global. I know that it's everybody everywhere, but it's an industry that won't come back first. We were the first to shut down, and we will be the first to open. And it's because our theater in particular does a lot of children's theater. So children not being able to be vaccinated means we can't open as soon as like big theaters like the Kennedy Center. We have to take that into consideration.
That's true.
Some theaters are able right now to open at 25% capacity. If we open at 25% capacity, we don't cover the bills for the day. So grants, I'm really excited and thankful that there are so many programs that exist where we can get grants, where we can get some funding, where we've been able to keep the lights on in a proverbial sense. But what I would really recommend, if this is of any interest to anybody, Find your local theater groups, ask if they're accepting donations, find out how you can donate to them. Are they doing any online programming? Are they on social media? If they're on social media, give them a like, give them a boost. It helps people find their page. We do free puppet showings every Friday at 10:30. They're all the shows that we pre-recorded before the pandemic. We're offering them for free so that people have something to do with their kids. And we've been pretty consistent. There's only been a couple of weeks where somebody forgot that it was Friday, with me, and didn't post a video. But for the whole week, you can watch one of these, pre-recorded shows, and it's just word of mouth. When we can open, we want people to come back. We don't want people to be afraid. We're trying to take all the precautions possible, but we want people to know we still exist. And I think that's important on a global level. Find those little communities, support those little communities. A lot of puppeteers wear a lot of hats. I'm the artistic director, but I'm also a puppeteer, and I'm also the director, and I'm also the editor currently, and I'm also the filmographer currently, and I'm also the sound editor currently, and I'm also the building manager currently. So that's not unusual in puppetry. Lots of people do a lot of roles. So, find those communities, support those communities, and when people are able to reopen, give them your support if you can. I know everybody's hurting, and it's been a weird, weird year, but that's the best way that you can help these artists make it through.
Elizabeth Dapo, thank you so much for coming on, and maybe someday we will be able to pressure institutions to care about the theater like they care about sports, and then there'll be some real investment in the thing we care about.
I hope so. Yep, that would be fantastic.
Thank you so much. See ya.
Thank you. Bye.